Right.
Oh, goodness. I'd like to see everybody make it, and as somebody pointed out, it's a lot cooler in here than it is outside.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Still at 90, dude.
You know what? I don't actually know.
Supposed to be in.
I think it's probably in the 90s. Probably still is.
Yeah, 93.
Yes. Nice and comfortable in here, about 72, 73 in here.
Yeah.
All right, praise reports. I got one. I finally got those big limbs that fell in the backyard. Charlie got my chainsaw back in great working order, so I made kind of quick, short order of that today. Got my backyard cleaned up. Now tomorrow, I start on the last of the tumbleweeds.
Wow.
If anybody haven't been paying attention driving by, the tumbleweeds out here.
Tumbleweeds.
No, there's not.
They're not, they're gone now?
They've been gone for a couple weeks now.
Yeah, the one in the front, yeah, I know.
Some of you haven't been paying attention.
I didn't know it was gone.
Next time I'll gather them up and bring them to you. That way.
I know.
Too broke to pay attention.
What, Charlie?
Isn't that too broke?
Too broke to pay attention. Oh, praise reports. I don't want to be the only one to share. I got some others.
Go ahead. I just want to praise the Lord. I thought I lost my cell phone yesterday, but I found it this morning at the office over there.
Okay.
I got a couple of them. I meant to mention it on Sunday, but I didn't think about it until later. Remember I had the first episode with the scorpion? Well, I had a second one. And this time it was in bed with me. I was laying on my side and I went to put my hand out on my leg. And I felt something, so I swished it off, thinking maybe it's something, and then I thought maybe it's a spider. So I got a ink pen with a light on it, and I first didn't find it, but my cat sleeps underneath the bed, and I heard commotions. Next thing I saw was a baby scorpion on the wall. So the first one was the mom or the daddy.
Wow.
And then, so I didn't get bit by him, or whatever. Got cut for that. Second thing is, I thank God that I got money still put down to get new mattresses.
Yeah, you can figure out where they're coming from.
Right.
Any others?
Had a real good day at work. I managed to get parts changed out on my truck and it's running so much better. It handled the heat just fine today.
All right.
So,
Well,
are you
my,
gonna be able to go to Amarillo with it?
Hoping to
Once it's put together?
get it finished. I got a few other things I need to do.
my Chi Alpha kids were part of a meeting with a bunch of others today at our district leadership, and so it was very encouraging. Had a great day, and they fed them lunch, a good lunch. My other son is happy. He got like about his fourth raise in the little over a year he's been at that job. So
Yeah.
Wow.
my wife says if there's one of those stores a little closer, you know, she said you could go work part-time with the kind of money they pay. Any others?
I have one, I'm doing pretty good for my leg finally.
Good.
Not hurting so much now. I just been taking care of it.
Good. You want to go run a race?
Yep, I'm ready to go
Well, you
run.
go right ahead. I'll watch.
I'm ready for
I got a message from Treville a while ago about Ronza. We really keep Ronza in prayer. The other day, she had another spell of fainting. They got her to the ER in Valhart. They felt it was bad enough. They flew her to Amarillo. They got her heart rate down, and then they sent her home. So she's having to rest and be very careful, and they're trying to figure out what to do. She's going to have to get to a heart specialist. So let's keep that in prayer. Keep my dad in prayer. He's planning on coming up Saturday. He will just a few days. A week from today is my wife's birthday, so he's coming up this week. Spend some time with us. Any other prayer requests?
So I have to take back, tomorrow's my dad's birthday.
Marnie's your dad's birthday. Tuesday is Caitlin's. So, got a lot of birthdays coming up.
Remember my mom,
Okay, remember Queen. Any others?
And I forgot to tell you that they said that Elsie Garcia is doing a lot better than that.
Okay. And I don't know who it was, but this afternoon, I was out running around, taking care of some stuff, and the ambulance picked somebody up back on them over here, just the other side of this truck bypass. So, or at least they were at somebody's house. So, just keep everybody in prayer. I will say this, one of the things that we all need to do as Christ followers, and I'm not saying go radical on this, do your best to take care of yourself. Okay? Let's face it, we're all getting older each and every day, and we need more sleep. We need to watch our diets. We need to understand we can't do as much as we did 10 years ago.
That's right, we
Can't do as much as we did 5 years ago.
Can't.
Some of us can't do as much as we did a year ago, okay? So we need to take care of ourselves. We honor God by taking care and making sure we get enough rest,
Yep.
eat well, enough fluids, keep yourselves hydrated. Any others? Katrina, what did she do?
Apparently they didn't, this is my opinion, apparently they didn't check her handgun when she broke her wrist, because when she went back for a checkup after it had healed, they told her her tendon in her thumb had ruptured, and told her that wasn't a problem for this type of work.
Okay.
So why did they find it?
Why did they do something to keep it from doing that a little more? Yes.
They're sending her to PT and doing their study and talking about surgery and everything out for finger.
Wow.
She might have been better off if they just done the surgery to begin with.
But that was only on the wrist. She's
When this is just the thumb.
just.
Okay, the wrist is okay. More or less.
I don't know the stiffness, I mean, it is so stiff.
She's gonna have to probably get used to that. It probably will loosen up some, but never back to normal.
Yeah,
Not
and
normal.
they do surgery, they're gonna put her hand back in cast for 4 weeks.
Hmm.
So,
And it's her right hand,
right hand.
and she's right-handed. Well, see, this will give her the opportunity to learn how to be in her right mind, because she'll have to use that left-handed. Any other prayer requests?
I just remembered of something else. Since I had that, gallbladder operation and stuff, I still lift hay bales and stuff, but I got to the point where I was tired. And I'm always glad that I have somebody who'll come over and help. If I can't get anybody, I gotta deal with it, but I'm gotten. And I like it better the other way.
Any others?
I just need prayer, I've been having severe headache.
And the seeds stay hydrated.
I stay hydrated.
Any others? Sister Betty, would you lead us in prayer?
Thank you for everything you've done for us here, Lord. Thank you for the many blessings here. Father, you've heard these prayer requests, Lord. You know our hearts cry to you. And Heavenly Father, as we lift up these needs unto you, Jesus, you know our needs. And Father God, we ask you many blessings. We pray for all those in the church, Jesus, our brothers and sisters here, God, and their needs, dear Lord. Heavenly Father, we pray for those that will be listening to this message, Jesus, and we ask that you would bless their needs to you, watching over them and blessing their lives, dear God, as they receive the word. God, may our hearts be open to receive what you have for us this time. We ask it all in the precious name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you, Father, in Jesus' name.
All right. All right. Tonight's lesson, this one actually, I told you 2 weeks ago, or last week, that lesson took me like 2 weeks to research and put everything together, and I just struggled with it. This one came together so easily. I told my wife yesterday when she was doing some stuff in the house, I said, okay, I'm going to go to the office, I'm going to do my research, so that tomorrow, meaning Wednesday, I can get this lesson put together. And this thing fell into place so easily that I had it finished yesterday afternoon. So, kind of got me ahead tonight, which is good. The Great Flood. We're going to look at biblical account and we're going to look at world history accounts of the flood story. But I want to first, and let's see if it's going to play. I should probably just go back there so it doesn't. I want you to watch a short video. It's put out by the people who built the big ark, experienced the big life-size ark, and just a little bit of interesting fact about the story of the ark. Now, those of you watching online, you can hear the audio, which
Or the worldwide flood. I'm standing here in the Flood Legends exhibit at the Ark Encounter, an exhibit that tells us the answer to that question is absolutely not. There are hundreds of legends from around the globe about a worldwide flood. And it's interesting because they have many of the same details. They'll talk about how God or the gods were angry with humanity because of something that humanity was doing. And so the one god or many gods said they were going to destroy the earth, and they warned one family or one righteous person to build this vessel, and whether it's a raft or a canoe or the ark itself, like you read in the Bible. And then they're going to have all the animals that they had to bring on board, and then the flood comes, wipes out every single person on the earth, except for the people on board that vessel. And sometimes at the end of it, they even send animals off to determine how deep the water is, or they even have a sacrifice afterwards, or there's a rainbow mentioned at the end of it. And we have all of these similarities. And skeptics will look at that and say, well, that's just because the Bible copied from ancient flood myths, or it's because missionaries went to these different places. And while that idea could account for some of the similarities in the accounts, it could never explain all of the many differences in those accounts. For example, the ark itself. The Bible is the only one that gives us a vessel that has the proper dimensions to survive and keep its passengers safe. You might have heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's an enormous cube that's 7 levels deep, and the flood lasts for a total of 7 days. A worldwide flood in 7 days is implausible, and that vessel would rock so badly from side to side, the passengers would never live through it. The Bible is the only one that gives us the dimensions of a vessel that would survive and keep its passengers safe. And the notion that missionaries would have gone to these different places and spread all of these wrong ideas about the flood, all of those differences between the Bible and the other flood accounts, doesn't make any sense. Why would Noah's name in one culture be 6 to 8 syllables long rather than just Noah? The biblical account makes perfect sense of that. That is, that as people scattered from Babel, they took that history with them of the worldwide flood, and generation after generation, as they passed that down, it's kind of like the telephone game. These little differences creep in generation after generation. That's where you get those differences, but that kernel of truth is still there. Speaking of Babel, that's the place where people were building that infamous tower where God came down and confused their language, forcing them to scatter around the globe. And did you know that we have nearly 24 Babel myths or legends from around the globe as well, from these ancient cultures, many times with a lot of the same details, but again, those differences, just like we saw with the flood legends. And it's not just the flood in Babel. We also have creation myths about how man was made from the dust of the ground, just like we read in Genesis chapter 2. And then these myths will talk about how the Great Spirit breathed on, or this wind came along and made him alive. Again, very similar sounding to the biblical account, but differences as well. And then we also have dozens and dozens of accounts of the reason that man dies, or the reason that man became sinful, has something to do with a tree and or a serpent. That is found all over the globe. So you have these details throughout Genesis 1 through 11 that are found in these ancient cultures, and yet they don't know anything about Genesis 12 onward. How do we explain that? Well, from a biblical perspective, it makes perfect sense. When God confused the language at Babel and he scattered them around the globe, they took that history, that shared history that they had, they took it with them and passed it down generation after generation. And some of those details get twisted, some of them are forgotten. That's why you have those differences, and yet again, that kernel of truth is still there. While those many legends give us just pieces of the truth, God's word gives us the whole truth. And that is that man was exceedingly rebellious before the flood, and God determined to wipe them out with a worldwide flood. Yet he showed his grace and mercy to Noah and his family, and representatives of each of the land animals on board the ark. To find out more about those flood legends, and the true history of our world, which is revealed in Genesis, in Scripture, God's inspired word, come to the Ark Encounter and go to arkencounter.com.
All right. Came across that, which was a point I was going to make anyway. So let's just take a little bit, and you've got a few things to answer on the first page. After that, it's just us and we can get the information. Let's look at the biblical account. And I put out the notice for you. I hope some of you did this, that you took time to read familiarize yourself with Genesis chapter 6 through chapter 9, verse 3. The biblical account of Noah and the ark. First of all, who are the main key people in the story? Well, it's Noah and his wife. And what was her name?
And his 3
Yeah,
kids.
I'm not known.
You know what the little kids have said? That her name is Joan of Arc, but that's not quite right. Mrs. Noah. And then their three sons that were, as we mentioned in the last couple of weeks, we don't know if they had other children or not, but these 3 sons were faithful to follow mom and dad's lead in this case. And that was Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. And I want to bring this point out again. I made it last week. We talked about how prior to this time, how the world's population had exploded, how many of the technologies, many inventions came about. And yet, when these 8 people survived the flood, God allowed them to retain that knowledge so that they could teach it to the next new generations that came from. Other key people, everyone else that was alive at the time, if you remember our last lesson, we said the population based on all these different resources, they really don't know. It could have been anywhere from a few 100,000 to a few billion. We don't know because of the time frame and the fact that people multiplied. All right, what is the biblical reason given for the flood? Somebody want to look at Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Huh?
Wickedness.
Go ahead and read it, if you've got it.
Okay.
Yes.
When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose.
Okay, I want to stop you right there for a moment. That's a newer translation. It should simply say, the sons of men. This apparently is influenced by somebody that wants to say that the sons of God were angels that married human women. Jesus put that theory to rest when he told them the angels do not marry. They're not really male or female. They're not given in marriage, and they do not reproduce. Go ahead.
Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe the face of the earth, wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them.
Go ahead and reverse it.
But Noah found favor in the eyes of the
Okay, the older version say Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's also a little song. All right, what brought about this time, this fact that God was going to just wipe everything out? It's Charlie had it. It was man's wickedness and rebellion. They had rebelled against God. I don't want to jump into this deep, but the Nephilim were men of renown. They were the heroes of old. And remember, a long time has happened on the earth before we get to Noah, from creation to Noah. There's a couple thousand years, approximately, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 years. They're heroes. The stories get better. Who are some of our national heroes that the farther we are removed from them, the more heroic they get?
Washington.
George Washington,
That one.
Abraham Lincoln. They were great men, they were great presidents, but the further removed we are from them, the more heroic they often are made to sound. And there's a lot of stories that get told about them that are not true, or they're only half truth. And who was it? I can't remember now which writer it was. Maybe Mark Twain said, when the legend when the truth gets in the way of the legend, print the legend, okay?
John F. Kennedy.
That's what I was thinking,
He's
Kennedy.
big.
Kennedy,
Well, I don't know.
yeah, there's a lot, and that happens. It happens in history of politics, it happens in the history of war heroes, it happens in the history of the church.
Well, they even
Okay,
talk about-
there are certain great men and women of God that we look back on, that we remember all the good, and we kind of tend to, as time goes by, we try to filter out the bad. Until recently, when we started, everybody's become woke, and now nobody's worth a hoot. Okay? All right, so man's wickedness and rebellion. How long did it take them to build the ark?
120 years.
About 100 years, give or take, 120 years.
I looked it up, I was looking up, and then somebody did a search on it, and did the math of when each child was born, and when he was told. So, from God saying man will live 120 years, it's probably less than that.
It took him about 100 years, because God told him it was about 500, and he entered the ark when he was 600. Now here's an interesting thought, and I wish I remembered to do this today. We have actually done some stuff with an organization, a ministry out of Albuquerque called Faith Comes by Hearing. They put together like these Bible sticks where the audio Bible is on like a thumb drive. I remember, goes all the way back to when I was working in my home church. I would go there for the church, and we would buy our blank cassette tapes from there. The couple that started that ministry, and now I think their son or grandson's continuing, but the wife had this thing that came to her mind, and she had this big, giant model in her office that she had built over time, showing what the inside of the ark would look like. She actually believes that during that 100 years, while Noah and the boys were building the ark, she really believes that Noah's wife was the first zookeeper. That she began to take care of animals and to learn about them and to learn how to feed them and how to take care of them so that they would know how to do that when the time came. Now, I don't know, there's nothing in the Bible to support that, but what are we finding out in this study? The Bible doesn't tell us all the details. It's not its purpose. All right, what else was Noah doing during that 100 years besides building the ark?
He's gathering the animals.
Well, he was doing something else. Somebody look up 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 5 and 6.
Preaching.
Look up the scriptures. You've got the answer, but this is Bible study. Open the scriptures. 2 Peter 2, verses 5 and 6. What does Peter tell us?
Got it on my phone, it's hard to see.
That you can enlarge that font, Charlie.
If he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness,
Okay.
and 7 others.
All right. I want you, I've talked with other pastors, and we sometimes kind of comfort ourselves in this. Noah preached a message of salvation to those people for 100 years and didn't have a single convert outside of his family.
They just kept telling these preachers.
They just kept doing it. Jesus himself talks about, says, it was in the days of Noah. People were marrying and giving in marriage and just, they're going about life. But it was a life where they refused to acknowledge Christ or to acknowledge God. All right, here's the trick question. How many of each animal species did Noah take on the ark? All right. He was to take 1 pair of every unclean animal.
And 7.
And now it depends on the translation here. It was either 7 total of each clean animal or 7 pairs of each clean animal. And that's one of those things that the Hebrew is not real easy to translate, okay? There's
7 pairs of
I was
each.
thinking the pairs, yeah.
makes more sense. It does.
I think it's a pair.
And you find that in Genesis 7, 2, and 3. Now, Joyce said 7 or 7 pairs of the clean animals for sacrifices, but there's also, I think, another possible reason. What was one thing that they could do with clean animals that they couldn't do with unclean animals besides sacrifice?
Eat them.
Eat them.
Yeah, even.
All right? Now, some will jump in and say, well, were they meat eaters at this time, or was that only after the flood? I don't know. Okay, the Bible doesn't specify
You
that.
don't say.
Most of the time, if any of you are like me, if you grew up in church and in Sunday school as a child, you heard time and time again, Noah took 2 of every animal. But the reality is that's where we need to be a little more careful in our reading of the scripture. He took 2 of most animals. He took possibly 7 or 7 pairs of other animals. Now, let me just toss this out there for you, something to think about. There was limited space on the ark. Some of those animals are very big. Have any of you ever had the pleasure of riding an elephant?
No.
I have. Have you? San Antonio Zoo?
Oh, well.
Don't remember. I rode both an elephant and camel at the Albuquerque Zoo years and years ago, after Cindy and I were married. I will just tell you, some of you that ride horses, you think you can get bow-legged. Let me tell you something. You ride an elephant very long, you don't know what bow-legged is, okay? Here's the thing. We picture adult animals coming on the ark, but who's to say that God didn't send him infants or ones that were weaned but not full-grown adults? And when some try to say, well, wait a minute, how in the world can he take all those species? Because look at all the species of dogs. Well, the truth is, he may have only had a small sampling of them, and over the course of time, as they have bred and interbred, the new species have come about. See, there's people who will always try to find silly things to discredit this story. Now, what about the dinosaurs?
No room for dinosaurs.
Well, here's the reality of that, as far as size. When we talk dinosaurs, we always want to talk about Tyrannosaurus rex and Stegosaurus and Brontosaurus and you know, Fred Flintstone's crane dinosaur and all of those big ones. The reality of it is that the fossils that have been found, the majority of dinosaur species were not much bigger than the average sized dog. Now, do we have any creatures today that we could say are pretty much modern day dinosaurs in some respect?
Birds.
No, I don't even think the birds are chickens. I don't think the birds and chickens, and I don't think the birds evolved from dinosaurs.
No,
I think that probably the closest we have is the alligator and the crocodile.
yeah.
Now, what happened to all those other types that we found fossils for? We don't know, but there's a lot of creatures over the course of time that have gone extinct. Why does God allow that? I have no idea.
There's some they're finding in the ocean and seas and stuff.
Yeah, they're fine. They found some, like that one fish, I never can remember.
Coelacanth.
Coelacanth, that they said, it has been extinct for millions of years, and then the fishermen caught one. And since then, they found a lot of them. So, all right. How long did it rain?
40 days.
40 days.
40 days and 40 nights. It's found in Genesis 7:17. But how long were the flood waters covering the earth?
150 days.
150 days. That's in Genesis 7:24.
That's right.
Okay. Everybody getting those numbers written in there on your sheets? After the first page, you don't have to fill in any blanks, okay? Does the Bible indicate that the entire earth was covered? Now, let me tell you why. Somebody find Genesis 7:17-24. Let me tell you why I asked that question. There are a lot of scientists who do not believe the Bible. They do not believe this story. But they do say that they will go so far as to say that what they find through their diggings and their research, they say, oh, there was a localized flood in that one area maybe, but we don't think there's a possibility that it could have been a worldwide flood. But what does Genesis 7:17-24 say, if somebody will read that nice and
I
loud?
have it.
All right, nice and loud, Georgia.
For 40 days, the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose gently on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 20 feet. Every living thing that moved on the earth perished. Birds, livestock, wild animals, all the creatures that swarm over the earth, and all mankind.
Keep going.
Everything on the dry land that had the breath of life in the nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out, men and animals, and the creatures that moved along the ground and the birds of the air were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days.
What's the one category of animals it doesn't mention? Fish.
The fish.
They're in the water.
However, if you had sea creatures that needed salt water, and that salt water got diluted by fresh water, some of them probably died. You had some that were fresh water that, as the salt water mixed in, possibly died. But more of them survived. Everything else that God created died, except for what was in the ark.
One of the things that a lot of people overlook though, is they hear rain 40 days and 40 nights. That's not where all the water came from.
That's right. It
The
says
water
the
came up
depths.
from under the ground
That's right.
too. And I just saw a show recently that they're finding these mysterious, weird-looking craters that some people are claiming are meteor craters, might have been source crater, water craters,
Instead of something coming from above doing it, was water.
crashing up
Could be.
from below.
From below.
In all honesty, I don't think we have the ability to fully comprehend the power behind this massive global flood
Yeah.
that God brought on the earth at that time.
Yeah, and they're finding the same layers all around the earth,
Yes,
the same things.
same things. All right, how long were Noah and his family and the animals on the ark?
I would say,
Over a year.
Okay, by calculating the numbers given in Genesis chapters 7 and 8, and I looked this up, I did not calculate it, they were on the ark a total of about 377 days.
It was over a year.
Just a little over a year.
Because the
Now-
first came, he was 600, and just after 600.
It was the second month of his 600
But
life.
how long did they stay on the ark? They stayed on for
Well, that
several months later.
No, that includes that.
No. I just got to reading it. It does not include that.
What I looked up, from
It does not include, they stayed on it until,
the second month of his 600
Yeah,
years.
the second, so they were on their,
Or not of his 600 year, of his 601st year.
601st year, so they were there on for a year and 2 months, just about. So
Well, the 377 days, the way they calculated it, said that the days in that time frame,
well,
a year was a few days shorter than now because there's been two supernatural events that have caused us to have a leap year. One was when God stopped the sun for,
a half a day.
what's his name?
Joshua,
Joshua. And then also, what was the king? And Hezekiah asked that time go backwards. The prophet says, what do you want God to show you that He heard your prayer? He said, I want the sun to go backwards. And when they calculate all that in, that's why our year now is actually 365 and a quarter days. That's why we had to have a leap year every 4 years. Because they calculated it, and our time around the sun has literally been thrown off that much in history. So, now, how many of you, Mary's got her horses, you've been around horses. How many of you ever been around a farm? Any of you raised on a farm? Lived on a farm?
Yeah.
Raised on.
Been around animals at the fair? How long do you have to be around them before you kind of want to get out there and get some fresh air?
Not very long.
Not very long. Can you imagine? Because remember, now there were openings at the top of this ark for light and a little bit of air to get in, but who shut the door?
God did.
God did. I don't know that they had a deck to walk out on like on the Love Boat, okay? I don't think they had, the Fiesta deck, the promenade. I don't think they had that. I think they were inside. I think they had openings where they got some light and air once the rain stopped, but they were in there. Now, can you imagine? Now, they must have had some way to scoop and toss. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about? I don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you got big animals,
But
big
can
animals.
can you just imagine? I mean, there's been times I've been to the zoo and they've had it where you could walk by where the animals spend a lot of their time inside and they'd have the door open because they're in there trying to clean it and you walk by and the smell just, ugh. Now, I want you to imagine this. For some time frame of over a year, I have a feeling it got kind of bad in there.
Maybe God.
And I don't know if they had much of a way to bathe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There again, that's one of those details that's not put in there. Now, we know they did.
Catch a pot.
Yeah,
Stick a pot out in the rain.
Jim,
There you go.
get your bucket out there, boy. You're meeting the bath now.
When it rains.
All right. That's the Bible story. Now, I want to quickly go through these accounts through world history. And I didn't give you all of them. I gave you some of them. We'll spend a couple of minutes longer on the first one because except for this biblical story of Noah and the ark, it is the most famous flood story out there. All right. I tell you here at the top of page 12. Everybody caught up now? Everybody on the right page? All right. The information in the following sections is modified from various websites. I didn't try to list all the websites, but there's a couple of them. This we saw in the video. There are over 200 flood myths or stories from all over the ancient world. If a worldwide flood never happened, why and how are there so many such stories? Something to think about. First one, and this one is the most famous one outside the story of Noah and the ark. You will, if you decide to do a little research, this story was written down long before Moses wrote the book of Genesis. So some non-Bible believers say, well, see there, Moses just copied from the Epic of Gilgamesh. No, that's not what that means. That simply means that Moses wasn't yet alive when a scribe wrote this story down because a king wanted him to write this. And actually, the Epic of Gilgamesh is an epic poem of two heroes. One is named Gilgamesh, and the other is named Enkidu. Almost sounds like something that Red Skeleton would say. Okay. Let me give you just a very brief summary of the part of this epic poem that we're interested in. The Epic of Gilgamesh, and you can follow along, and there's a picture of one of the ancient clay tablets that part of that was found on, okay? The Epic of Gilgamesh is an ancient Sumerian and Akkadian epic poem about the titled hero Gilgamesh. In this epic, Gilgamesh, the king of the city of Uruk, goes on a quest to find immortality after he and Enkidu, his companion, performed deeds that angered the gods, resulting in Enkidu's death. Despite going through many trials, Gilgamesh loses his opportunity for physical immortality. Does that sound a little bit like something in the Bible?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you get it? Adam and Eve had a chance to live forever. They did something in rebellion against God, and they lost their chance at immortality. Death entered the human race. That's all I want you to catch as we just briefly go through these other stories. Find the little bits of the real story that survived, okay? However, Gilgamesh becomes immortal in the memory of Uruk and its walls. He doesn't live on, but his story does, okay? Written in cuneiform on clay tablets, the Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest known epic poem. Due to its age and proliferation across the ancient Near East, the Epic of Gilgamesh has influenced epic poetry throughout time. Have any of you ever read the Odyssey or the Iliad by Homer?
Years ago.
Yeah, some of us had to. I think I still have my copies down in my library, and they're both about that thick.
Yeah.
And I have not pulled them off the shelf to read them
Since college.
ever. No, it's high school.
And they're all great to me.
No, mine are in English. All right, but this was the original, as far as what we have determined, this is the original epic poem. What does it mean to be an epic poem? What is an epic poem?
It's a big story.
Okay, it's very long. It talks about heroes and heroic deeds, but it does it in not straight prose. It does it in poetic terminology, okay? As Gilgamesh roams, he reflects on Enkidu's death. Enkidu was his uncivilized friend who was killed by the gods when they became angry with him and Gilgamesh. And he realizes his own mortality. He sets out to find Unapishtim, the only immortal person, to figure out how to become immortal himself. To get to Unapishtim, Gilgamesh first passes through the blinding darkness of Mount Mashu and into a land of jewels where he meets Siduri, a tavern keeper. Siduri instructs Gilgamesh to find Urshanabi, the ferryman, and upon finding Urshanabi, he eventually carries the boat to yeah, that guy. All right, to show that human immortality is impossible, Unapishtim recounts a great flood in which he was instructed by Ea, a god, to build a boat for him and his wife, making them the flood's sole survivors. After sending out a raven that never came back, oh, guess what? There's another little part of the real story that survived.
Yep.
After sending out a raven that never came back, landing his boat and giving offerings to the gods granted the couple immortality. All right, what did Noah and his family do once the boat landed on Mount Ararat and they finally realized the ground was dry and they could leave the ark? What's the first thing Noah did? He built an altar and he sacrificed to God. All right, this makes it impossible for Gilgamesh or any human to attain that status. Unapishtim later tells Gilgamesh that there is a plant that will grant him rejuvenation. Gilgamesh finds this plant, but while he is bathing, a snake steals it and sheds its skin. Huh. Wonder where they got that part of the story from. Once Gilgamesh and Urshanabi finally return to Uruk, Gilgamesh has the ferryman admire the city for its quality and antiquity, emphasizing that although he may die physically, Uruk will act as a memorial for Gilgamesh's legacy. All right? That epic poem literally starts and is very long. There was a short video that I watched that started to tell the whole story, and I'm like, no, I just could not subject you people to that, okay? There's bits and pieces of the truth. But as I said on that video we watched at first, it's like that game of telephone. The more it's told, as people move away from each other and as they started their own cultures and own civilizations, the story got muddled. But yet there's still parts of the truth there. All right, I want to quickly, because I don't want to keep you all past the normal time. Let's get through the rest of this. Here's some other ancient flood stories and myths. Okay, according to Vedic lore, that's a region of modern-day India, a fish tells the mythic Indian king Manu of a flood that will wipe out humanity. Manu then builds a ship to withstand the epic rains and is later led to a mountaintop by the same fish. Do you find parts of the truth there? Yeah. Some of the real stories survive. An Aztec story, okay, wait a minute, where are the Aztecs? And don't tell me northwest New Mexico.
They were in Mexico.
Okay, the Aztecs are down south in what we call now Mexico and South America.
Yeah.
An Aztec story sees a devout couple hide in the hollow of a vast tree with 2 ears of corn as divine storms drown the wicked of the land. Hawaii, a man named Nu'u. Hey, isn't that kind of close to the real thing? All right. A man named Nu'u made a great canoe with a house on it and filled it with animals. In this story, the waters came up over all the earth and killed all the people. Only Nu'u and his family were saved. You know, that one's closer. All right? How about the legend of Trenton Villu and Kaikai Villu? Comes from the mountains of southern Chile and the Chilean archipelago. What?
Archipelago.
Archipelago, thank you. I always trip over that one. And it is about the god of the earth and the god of the sea, two giant snakes who wage battle with each other. Kaikai Villu covered much of the land with water, but Trenton Villu, the god of earth, eventually won the battle. It was not without costs, of course, making what Chile and the archipelago are today. All right? They tell the story to try to teach why their nation is, and their land is shaped like it is. Unapacacuti is an Incan flood myth, and where were the Incans?
They were in northern Mexico.
They were down in Mexico, South America, and all that area as well.
Right.
This is the Incan flood myth. In this story, the creator god Contiki Viracocha created a race of giants out of large stones, but killed them in a flood because they were uncontrollable. Afterward, he created humanity with smaller stones. What does Moses record that the ancients in the Bible, what was it they talked about a lot? The Nephilim, that were the giants and the heroes of their day. Here again, little bits and pieces of the real story find its way there, but because they have moved away, because they become separated, because they stopped worshiping the one true God, they add, they change, they describe it as best they can. The Deucalion myth in ancient Greece, Deucalion was the son of Titan Prometheus. When Zeus wanted to destroy humanity because they were mean, greedy, and disobedient, like Zeus, Deucalion pleaded with him to have mercy, but Zeus had made up his mind. Deucalion took his father's advice and built an ark to save himself from the flood created by Zeus. A generation of men was killed by the flood except for Deucalion and his wife and those that made it to the mountains. Again, bits and pieces. Does anybody speak the Finnish language?
No.
Okay, then we're just going to call this Vainamoinen's blood flood. In Finnish mythology from Finland area, the epic hero, Vain, builds a boat on top of a mountain, but the devil hits him with an axe and floods the world with his blood. Vain takes the boat to travel to Pohjola, where culture starts anew. A little different twist. But do you see how these people, as they began to worship creation over the Creator, they still retained bits and pieces of the story, but they couldn't put them in the right order. They got them mixed up, and so they added to them. They created their own legends, their own myths to explain it. In a Maya flood myth, Huracan, a wind and storm god, caused the great flood because humans angered the gods. After the flood, 3 men and 4 women repopulated the world. Do you see a problem with that one?
Yeah.
You're going to have one jealous woman in that group
Yeah.
somewhere, right?
Yeah.
The Nisqually flood. In a Native American legend, the Puget Sound Indians said people became so numerous they ate all the fish and animals, so they started to eat each other. In Dokabato, the Changers sent a flood to punish them for their wickedness. The only 2 creatures left were a woman and a dog, and out of them came the next race of people.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, I am going to point something out to you. What did they say was one of the great sins that these people did after they'd eaten all the animals and fish? Huh? Cannibalism. I didn't put any of their stuff, but there are indications from archaeological digs of the time frame before the flood that have actually become a problem, and one of the wicked things that men were doing even in that time frame. Now, I don't know how widespread it was, but it has been, they have found evidence that at least in a few places it was.
Sieges, they did that a lot. In the sieges.
Yeah. All right, China. One of the Chinese legends explains that the flood was caused by an argument between a crab and a bird. Fu Hai, his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters, escaped the great flood and were the only people alive on earth. After the great flood, they repopulated the world. Now, do you notice a real definite similarity there.
Sounds three.
8 people.
8 people. All right.
Yep.
I give you a website there. That link has 25 great flood stories found around the world. Some of those are listed above. Some of them I did not list. If you really want to go to that webpage and look it up. Again, most of them have just a nugget of the real story still woven into it, but some of the other stuff that they came up with just is a little bit strange. Now, we've talked about this before, and I wanted to include it. I have always found this extremely intriguing since I first came across this. I think I came across this, I think before my wife and I were married, or shortly after. The flood story and other parts of Genesis are preserved in the ancient Chinese language. And we're talking about the written language. All right? According to tradition, throughout the reign of Yellow Emperor Huangdi, the very first characters, basic illustrations of familiar items, known as image words or pictographs, were created. Okay, this is in the region of China. If you look at last week's lesson and you look at the maps, the Bible keeps its story centralized to the location, basically, of what we call the Fertile Crescent. Modern day Israel, Arabia, Egypt, part of Asia Minor, that area.
Yep.
If you're looking at that map correctly, which direction do you have to go to get to China, left or right?
You have to go east.
Left or right?
I would say
If you're
right.
looking at your map. If you look at your map, east is to the right.
Would be right.
See, again, remember, we read the Bible and it sticks to the story that is the story of God dealing with mankind for salvation, but there's a lot of history going on all around other places.
Yep.
All right. The Oracle Bones writings were found during the 1800s by 2 Chinese scholars who observed engravings on turtle shells offered in Chinese medication stores in Peking. The Oracle bones were first excavated and cataloged in 1899 from a site in Yangyang near Xinzhou, the ancient capital of the latter part of the Shang dynasty of China, situated in modern Henan province. In these and subsequent excavations near Yangyang, more than 100,000 Oracle bones have actually been discovered, engraved with more than 1.6 million characters. The Oracle bone texts are the earliest extant documents written in the Chinese language. They are engraved on ox shoulder blades and the flat underpart of turtle shells, as the one shown there. I'll give you a little picture of one. This is what I want you to look at. We drop down below that picture, and I know that's kind of small, I apologize, but if I made it much bigger, I was going to have to go to another page. The Chinese, in this ancient Chinese written language, their pictograph for boat is made up of these 3 characters. The character for vessel, the character for 8, and the character for person. Now what does that sound like?
Yes,
You are. And why would the Chinese, who are way over here in the east, thousands of miles away from the Fertile Crescent, why would they think of boat and immediately think of 8 people on a vessel? Because the true story of Noah had gone with them when they migrated. All right, down the next one, and this one is really small, I apologize for that. The symbol for flood is made up of the symbols for water and total. And the symbol for total happens to be the 3 symbols of together, earth, and 8.
Oh, wow.
The number 8. Again, what do we find? We find parts of the real story. And the final one is to separate or division is the symbol 8 and a knife. What are they referring to there?
Sacrifice.
I think they're referring to the fact that the 8 people multiplied and then God divided the earth. That actually leads more to the Tower of Babel than it does to Noah's Ark. Although the illustrations above only serve to introduce this fascinating trove of pictographic philology, that's a big fancy word for word study, They do show what forensic professionals call a beyond genuine dispute witness of God's historic workings in Chinese history, producing a form of providential history and evidence of biblical truth. What does Paul talk about in Romans? He says, man has been without excuse for not serving the one true God, and what are the reasons he gives? He says, God's put his fingerprint all over creation. But then we come across things like this. Even in the myths and the legends that these people, they forgot all the truth, but they all maintained at least a nugget of truth here and there. God was still making sure they had just a little bit of it. All right, questions, comments on that?
What did you say about Paul and Romans? You talked about men.
You go read through the book of Romans. Paul talks about that man is without excuse when it comes to serving God, no matter what, because God has made himself very visible and plain in creation. And I add to that, God made himself very plain even in things like this with the Chinese language. I mean, let's face it, these people are thousands of miles away, removed in time by hundreds of years, and yet their pictograph, the symbol they use for boat, 8 people in a vessel. One. It's not coincidence. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Next week we move on. Pretty soon we will be at the point where I'll put that big 20-foot timeline back up here, probably half of it, the Old Testament part. I'll put that up here again so you can take time to look at it. But we're going to move. Now we're going to finally start in the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to start to move into historical time frames where we can better put an actual date to some of it. Not exact, not precise, because, I mean, you know, Abraham didn't exactly leave us a pictograph of his driver's license with his birthday on it, okay? But we'll start to get into stuff that more and more we'll be able to put an actual date to some of it. And again, we'll show what was happening in the Bible, and we'll show what was happening in other parts of the world that we know about at that same time to give us a little bit. I want to go back, and I know I keep going back to this one as a reminder of why I think this study is important. I have heard, I have seen too many things, even in churches, where they taught that, well, when the children of Israel became slaves in Egypt, they were there building the pyramids. No, they weren't. Abraham left Ur of the Chaldees, and when he did, the time that he did, the great pyramids at Giza were already 500 to 1,000 years old. Okay? I think it's important that we understand where does the biblical story fit into world history. It gives us a better idea of what was going on, and I think it increases our ability to see God's hand at work in all of history. Okay? God wasn't just interested in this one little strip. God's hand was being used all the way through. As we progress in the Old Testament and get closer to the time of the New Testament, one of the things that we will talk about at some point is how the fact that the Greek and the Roman, I want to say dynasties, but that's not really the word I want, but those were all planned by God for a purpose. They both serve a great purpose in the coming of Christ. And we'll talk about that kind of stuff. Any others? Georgia, dismiss us in prayer today, please.
Father, we thank you for this privilege of being here to study your word even more deeply and understand how history and the Bible agree in many ways, Lord. Father, I ask now that you go with us tonight and bring us back at the appointed hour to worship you, Lord. And we'll give you praise, honor, and glory. Amen.